In ministry, one of the great struggles, the younger you are, is leading people who are older than you. And so today in Practical Church Planting, we're going to share with you 7 tips for leading those who are older than you.
Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. Today we're going to be giving you 7 tips for leading people that are older than you.
And good news, I don't have my new city hoodie on, so
Finally.
I don't wear the same thing every
Only
day.
been a month straight.
This is an issue for everyone, if you have people that are older than you in your congregation.
Yeah, which
Particularly
most will.
the younger you are.
Mhm.
And if you are a church planter, this is going to be, you don't have to be young to be a church planter, but generally speaking, there's more younger people in it than people that are older.
Yeah.
And so you will face this a lot of what to do. Well, New City is 5 years in, and I'm 31, and I feel now that I'm just kind of, doesn't bother me as much as it did.
Mhm.
Still a little bit sometimes. Honestly, not really. Not one-on-one settings, like in group settings, which I'll talk about in a second. But it's difficult. Like, how do
Yeah.
you get people that are older than you, especially if you're in your 20s or 30s, and you desire people maybe in their 50s, 60s, 70s
Yeah.
to be a part of your team? What can you do to lead them well?
And one thing I'll add before we start is bother is probably not the best word, but it should matter to you. Like it should be like if you're going into this, especially if you're younger. I mean, if you're younger, like our age, and you're thinking like this isn't an issue or I don't struggle with this, then I would say you should in some capacity. Like you, not in the sense of like you need to have this as an insecurity, but
Yep.
I think you need to have the humility that you have a lot to learn and that you are young, which is good, and that this stuff will take time. So I think like whether worry is the right word or not, I think is whatever. But I think that this should be at least something that you think about.
Yeah, hopefully doing these things will make people older than you more willing to get on, jump in and
Mhm.
make you more comfortable leading them with
Yep.
your limited experience. So here's the first one: that your age is a bigger deal to you than to them. So this is a lot of us, regardless if you're like the lead pastor or not. Whenever you lead people older than you, especially earlier on, we don't have a lot of experience. It's a big deal to you. Like, why would anyone listen to me? Now, the good news is most people have their own jobs, their own lives. They're not trying to take your job. They're just trying to serve and be
Yeah.
a part. Like they're not looking to do what you're doing. And so they're happy to follow somebody who seems, my caveat here is, this is generally speaking, some people might.
Mhm.
So this is generally speaking. And also, as long as you don't present yourself or come across as immature,
Yeah.
it's not a big deal. And again, the older people people know that you're younger, that you don't know as much. Like it, I don't know. I think I think oftentimes people that are younger hold their age against them more than older people do, as long as they can like respect your character and know that you do a good job and work hard.
Yeah.
In my experience, they're totally fine. Like they're not like, oh, how many years have they done this? Do they know what they're talking about? As long as you're competent and you're not super immature, and like they're willing to work with you, to be a part of your church, to let you lead them, whether it's preaching from the stage or leading serve teams or groups or whatever capacity that might is, like a service event. I found people that are older are more than happy and willing to let younger people lead in those scenarios, as long as you have character and you're not super immature. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes with. It's kind of going to lead into a lot of what we're going to talk about, but I think age is less of an issue than, like you said, than character. And like when we started, you would have been what, 20, I don't know, 8 maybe? 26. Oh, well, I can't do math. 26. But if we were to, what am I trying to say? Like, I don't think necessarily in the beginning, everyone on staff came across as young as they were. In some cases we did. There's some things I think about that like, we're pretty dumb. Like we shouldn't have done that. But like, I don't think that everyone is necessarily looking at it as a bunch of young kids, because we're trying and we had at least some character, and like we weren't necessarily making a big excuse of we're this young, so this is okay. Or, we messed this up, we screwed this up, but we're just a bunch of kids, so whatever, that kind of thing. Where like, I think people could see even though we were kind of a younger crew, we were trying to do things that would serve an older crowd as well. And we weren't just trying to, we have older people here, but who cares, because we're young and we're just trying to talk to all the young people and stuff like that. But so I think people could see that. And obviously as time's gone on, we're still young, but we've kind of learned from those times and learn the things that messed up. But I think people care more about character and the way you act than they do strictly about how old you are.
Yeah, again, there are exceptions to this, but generally
Of course,
speaking, in
yeah.
my experience, it's you will talk about and bring up your age way more than anybody else will, and so you should be cognizant of it, and you should recognize that you are younger and you have a lot to learn, but don't hold it against you as much as people will not hold it against you as much as you will
Mhm.
if you make a big deal about it. So for that, encourage you.
Yeah.
That's the first one. Number two, being cool and hip is not a positive thing. Now, I want to clarify these are just experiences and advice. There are exceptions to every rule.
Sure.
I'm also not telling. I also think you should be who you are. So you should. We'll talk about dress here too in a second. Like you should dress how you dress, and you should be who you are. But just know that the younger you are, and the less experience or relationship an older person has with you, when you look a certain way and you speak a certain way and you act a certain way, in their mind, that's a knock against you, even
Mhm.
though there's nothing inherently wrong. I mean, generations are different. I'm sticking to it. When I was a kid, I hated when people said, "Well, when I was your age, blah blah blah," and I was like, "I'm not going to do it." And now that I'm only 31, I still have friends that will say, "Well, when I was a kid," I'm like, "Nope,
Mm.
I'm not doing it,"
Yeah.
because they're all different. And I don't know. Everyone thinks like their generation was like the golden generation.
Yeah.
Like when you were a kid, that's when whatever. It doesn't matter. Um, so all that to say, even with not good, bad intentions, like we all have our preferences,
Mm.
and so when people have different styles and do things differently than we do, we just naturally are suspicious.
Yeah.
Especially with someone who has a lot of life experience, and they might have seen a lot of younger people make poor decisions. They might think of themselves when they were younger and the poor decisions they made. And so, I want to be this one's a little difficult because be who you are, don't change who you are, but just know, sometimes when I'm doing, I mean, this is going to come across as judgmental, and I'm not trying to be, but I'll put my cards on the table. Certainly, this is. I'm not
Yeah.
perfect, and it's not an excuse. But like sometimes I'm on YouTube and like looking at stuff, trying to improve our channel, seeing what other churches are doing, and I'll see guys in their 20s. This past week, I saw some guy in his 20s with a super tight shirt,
Mhm.
and like the sleeves were kind of ripped to be shorter,
Oh yeah.
and like skinny jeans. And I don't know him. I'm not saying he's trying to act that way to reach a certain crowd. That could just be totally him, and there's nothing wrong
Mhm.
with that. But I could imagine someone who's 65 years old not loving that,
Yep.
even though there's nothing inherently wrong. So I'm just trying to say, your cultural dress, talk, what you look like, or what you say, how you present yourself, it matters to people that are older than us.
Mhm.
Right or wrong, it just does. And so it's just something to think about.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to put it. That this isn't. You can think that this point is like good or bad or
Yeah.
whatever, but this is just true. And whether this is a positive or a negative, I don't know. But I think back to a previous church experience I had where some of the leaders in the church before New City and back in Michigan were very, I don't know, cool, trendy, maybe, like in the way they dressed. And things like, ripped jeans and dyed hair, all this stuff. Like, who cares? But like, it's like very clearly, and like getting to know these people, that was their normal day to day. However, the challenge is someone seeing you for the first time doesn't know that's your normal day to day. And so I'm not even saying they should have changed anything. I'm not at all. But I do have an experience with someone that we know who we invited them. They went and they're older. And that was one of their first takeaways. And you can say this is completely wrong, and maybe it is. But it's just a fact of the matter of what happened is they felt like they were just trying to be cool, and they cared more about how they looked than about what they were actually preaching. I don't necessarily, not knowing them, I don't think that was the case, but these people didn't know them. And so that does, they didn't get to know them. That's just a judgment up front. And we can say it's wrong to judge all day long, and sure it is, but that's just the way that they were coming across. And so this is just something to keep in mind, that if you are a person who, like, the way you dress or the way you act is in a very kind of I don't know, what's the way to put it? That in that kind of manner where you are kind of more trendy or want to look cooler. Not saying change anything, but that could be a negative factor when it comes to an older crowd.
Yeah, it's my opinion that churches, while we are welcoming to all people, you're not going to reach all types of people.
Mm-hmm.
The type of music that you do will limit the type of people who come.
Yeah.
Where you meet, the financial status of the church. Like, there's a lot of things. So if there's a trade-off, like dressing a certain way and this can go otherwise. I mean, if you dress super traditional, that can be positive and negative. It's not like
absolutely.
trendy is the bad thing. It's just you will, how you dress and how you carry yourself will reach certain people more than others.
Mm-hmm.
And that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Just know, if you are in a particular area, and let's say a lot of people do dress like that. I mean, that's we all dress like the people around us anyway. So
Sure.
it's like
Yeah.
we're not that individualistic. But just know that someone that's older, that might be a little bit of a turnoff for them, and that might be okay because you can't be all things to all people.
Mhm.
But just know that that does impact people that are older than you if you maybe do things way differently than they would, even though there's nothing wrong with them. It's just something to be cognizant of.
Yep. I have more clothing thoughts, but we'll talk about them in the next point.
Cool. So cool and hip isn't a positive in the sense of older people, generally speaking. It's harder for them to connect. Not saying you can't do it, but just know that that can be.
It will be
way.
something to overcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Number 3, speaking of, I would encourage you to be conscious of what you wear when you're meeting with people who are older than you.
Mhm.
And again, not changing completely who you are. But I did this. I still do it. Like if I'm meeting someone older than me, I'm not going to wear shorts.
Hmm.
I'm probably going to not wear a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Now it's to the point now where we've had some people that are around for a while that it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about too the age of the church and how long you've been around also kind of impacts this. But especially in the beginning, if you don't know these people very well, I probably wouldn't wear a hoodie.
Mhm.
And again, this is where we live in Raleigh. I mean, where you live, it might be completely different.
Yeah.
Probably it's completely different. So whatever it is for you, this is just my experience. Because I wanted them to not. I don't know. I already knew that I was a lot younger than them.
Mhm.
Didn't know them very well, and so I just wanted to come across as someone who this is the lack of a. I wouldn't say this, but lack of a better word, who like played the part
Mhm.
a little bit better of a pastor who cares and wants to listen to them and meet with them. And so, again, there's people now who've been around for a while where I would wear whatever,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't matter because we have a relationship and they know me, they've been here. But if someone, even today, I mean, if someone's brand new and they in their 40s or not, probably not 40s, because it's about 50s, 60s, 70s, the older they are, I'm definitely going to make sure if I'm meeting with them, particularly like in a one-on-one setting, that what I'm wearing, isn't too, not that I'm really trendy, but isn't too that way, and is more something that they might be comfortable with, just to try to be, not to, Jesus juke it, but as Paul says, all things to all people, as best I can,
Mhm.
to try to make them maybe be more relatable to them and what they might think I'm supposed to look like.
I think one kind of little easy rule of thumb is just to try and like we're saying, these are blanket statements, adapt them to your context. But it's easy to think about in terms of trying to stay away from extremes is kind of the way I sometimes think of it. Like, and to me this goes whether meeting with someone one-on-one or in a case of like preaching or something like that, where like in my mind, I don't want to like I'm the least trendy person in the world. So I'm not worried about like am I going to look too cool, but I don't want to look too relaxed. Like if I'm meeting with somebody one-on-one.
Yep.
Great, this is different if it's like a close buddy. But like especially if it's someone older or someone who I don't know super well, like I don't want to show up looking like this wasn't important to me. But also I don't want to I want them to show up and be comfortable too. So I don't want to show up overdressed just to get lunch with them and make them feel bad that they showed up in a t-shirt. You know what I'm saying? And so I think finding those kind of happy mediums where it's what you like to wear, it's comfortable for you, but it's also not going to kind of alienate them in one direction or the other is helpful. And I think you can use this can apply to preaching as well. I think even if you're a super trendy person, you can kind of find a medium to where you can be as trendy as you want to be, but also not to the point where it's distracting.
Yeah.
I think regardless of your context, you can get to points where what you're wearing is distracting. And so trying to tone it down a little bit just so that it doesn't take away from what you're actually trying to say.
Yeah. And of course, there's limits to this.
Mhm.
Like, let's say if I was going to meet with someone who, I don't know, is a business person and dresses up all the time, like I'm not going to
Sure.
meet them in a suit.
Yeah.
So like there are
Yeah.
I'm also not going to like go buy clothes to meet with somebody.
Yes. Yeah.
But with what I have though, I'm just going to be cognizant of what I'm wearing to try to connect with them, And so you might like that, you might not like that point, but it's just true. Regardless of your age, we all kind of judge and see if people are like us, and so you want it to the best of your ability, show them that you can relate to them, and be wearing what you wear, especially when you're meeting with them, can help that.
Yep. For sure.
Number 4 is to remember that credibility takes time. So you might want to, I mean, as much as we want just people to like come in and trust us, it's just hard, especially if you're younger and they've got decades on you. Consistently, just being there, being present, talking to them when you see them on Sundays or whatever. You can't rush this. This one's not really rocket science, or this is not something you probably didn't know. But it's just important to remember. I mean, New City's turning 5 in April of this year, and so we've had some people that have been around for a couple of years, and I just know through conversations that there's more trust and credibility that I have built up with them than when I started, just because we were new.
Mhm.
they were new and I was younger. And again, as we'll talk about, I think the older you are, the more initial trust you will get for someone who's older.
Yep.
And the bigger the age gap is. Again, some people won't even think about it, but some will. And just to know it just takes being faithful over time. And there might be some people who in your church who like don't really respect you or have problems with you. And I would just encourage you to keep showing up and to keep loving them. And over time, it may never be what you want, but their trust in you can improve what it is now.
Yep. I think everyone knows credibility takes time, but it's hard to actually remember that when you're dealing with it. Like there'll be times, especially in the beginning, where you may have people that are older than you that won't, confide in you with things, or you may try and develop relationships with them that they may not seem to be going anywhere. And I think it can be easy just to get really frustrated really quick. But just remember, these things take time, and this isn't everyone. You don't have to have everything solved year one. And as time goes on, as Dylan said, we're 5 years in, and these relationships are a little bit easier to form now.
Yeah.
But that's not because of we did anything magical. It just takes some time for some of these relationships to form and for people to gain, or for you to gain people's trust and things like that. So allow it to take time. That doesn't mean ignore it or don't do anything, but don't try and rush people into situations they're uncomfortable with or anything like that.
Yep. So just remember that it takes time.
Yep.
Number 5, the age of your church impacts initial trust. So when people walk in, if it's a brand new church plant led by young people, obviously there's going to be like, well, is this going to work out? Do you have a lot of experience? How's this going to go? If somebody walks into a church that appears to be more established, well, there's just going to be this assumption, right or wrong, there's going to be this assumption that they must have a little bit more figured out. And I wouldn't, maybe age is not always the most appropriate. It could just be, part of it is age, because if you're brand new, people know. But part of it is, you could be 5 years in and still be a small church plant. You're renting a space and setting up, tearing down every week, and it's like I don't know how to say it. It's clear that you're still not. How much should I say this? It looks newer. It doesn't look established. That's maybe the best word. Even though you've been doing it for a while and you know what you're doing and you've been faithful, there's just that initial thing. And so when somebody walks in a new city, we have our own space. Everything is fine on a Sunday morning. So it doesn't really matter whether we are 5 or 15 years old is kind of irrelevant at this point, just because it just appears that things are together.
Yeah.
And that's not all on us. It's just, we have a space. Things work out for churches some than others. But just know that the age of your church and really what the Sunday morning looks like will impact kind of where that starting level is of where they're going. And right or wrong, I'm not saying it's a bad thing or a good thing. It's just, again, people are people. And so just know, again, if you're brand new starting out and it's kind of obvious that you're starting out, it's not even that the older people don't want to trust you or don't want to jump in. It's just, it's going to take some time, because it's like, do they know what they're doing? And if you have things a little bit more established, even if you don't know what you're doing, if appearances of know what you're doing, that initial trust level will be higher when they walk in, and there's really nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, I think we can forget that most people, the vast majority of people, have no experience with a church plant. And so as you plant, you're going to have people that come that have never been part of a church in its first year before, and have only been a part of churches that are well established. And that's not a bad thing, but this is new to them. And so, if you've never had experience with a brand new church, then it can be easy to look at it with a skeptical eye, especially if it's led by people that are 20 years younger than you or so. And so it's just kind of one of those things where there's just a little bit working against you in the beginning, and these aren't bad things, but just may take a little bit of time to build that trust and to build those, that foundation, which is fine. And let people take the time and address, as they're willing to talk to you about them, address the issues that come up and talk to people about it and keep going. And it takes some time. And what we've seen is a lot of people that maybe would have been more skeptical at the beginning, or maybe skeptical is not the right word, but maybe a little more hesitant to really be super bought in the beginning. A lot of them did stick around and ended up being bought in, but it didn't take a few months. Like, it took some time, and that's perfectly fine.
And I think this is just important too, because again, we can compare ourselves to other churches where it's like they seem to get older people that connect right away. And like, why don't we? Well, there's a lot of factors. Again, if the church appears more established, or the other pastors are older, there's a lot of reasons that for church plants led by younger people in the beginning, it's harder to gain an older crowd for various reasons. So some of these are trying to help you with it, but don't get super discouraged, because it's not like something you can just flip a switch and change. Like, again, I just noticed if people that are older come to New City now, because compared to 4 years ago, their chances of staying are a lot higher, even though we're not doing anything different.
Yeah.
Just because there's other older people.
Mhm.
It's the Sunday morning is fine. It's just like I think if you were walking again, it would be like this for any church plant. If you walk into New City versus now versus the first 6 months, it's just like, oh, they seem to know what they're doing a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I'm more likely to trust them, and that could be regardless of age, obviously, but especially if they're a little older.
And I mean, in the beginning, especially with us, like there are things that you don't have ironed out that take some time to figure out. Like if someone's coming, not even coming from like a big mega church or anything like that, but if someone's coming from just a church that's been established for a long time, they might not be used to seeing things like a screen's not working or a missed mute cue or just like these little minor things where now we're 5 years in, we still have tons of issues that come up here and there, but most of the issues that people see are kind of taken care of. Like we don't have as many outward facing issues on a Sunday morning that people can see if they don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Where in the first year we had a lot more issues because we couldn't afford the stuff all we could afford would break or people were figuring it out and things like that. And so this may be someone's first experience with some of the more technical side of things going wrong. And what we know is that's not a factor of like that you don't care or because you're young. It's just a matter of a lot of times, the budget to fix it or whatever, but they might not know that. And so it's just kind of dealing with these little, I don't know, not objections, but little things as they come up, and it takes some time to build that credibility.
Yep. All right. Number 6, this one's, I think, really important, and hopefully this will be helpful for you, particularly when you're talking or meeting with people older than you, is it's okay to simply ask and listen. So when I get together with people that are older than me, particularly if they're newer, I will ask them different things than if someone who is around my age or younger. I know that they have a lot of life experience and wisdom on me. I'm also cognizant of, even if there's not like, again, most people aren't thinking about a big age difference. I just know it's weird if someone 2 decades younger than you. And again, the older you get, like a 50-something-year-old to a 70-something-year-old is a lot different than like a 31-year-old to a 55-year-old.
Yeah.
I mean, just a lot less experience there. And so I would just encourage you to not feel like you have to, I don't know, shepherd's not the right word, like teach and grow them. Sometimes it's just listening. And so like if I'm meeting someone who's newer to around New City and they're around my age or younger, I'll ask more, personal questions about their childhood, where they grew up. And I might ask those things too, but they're kind of more of a bent of like, get to know them. I know if they're around my age or younger, they're more likely and oftentimes want to maybe talk about what's going on in their life and get some advice. And older people are not always wanting that from someone that's younger than them. And so like when you meet with older people, it's for me, it's more so just hearing their story, talking to them, asking about their life, but it's not from a sense of how can I like help and serve you.
Yep.
It's more of I just want to get to know you because I've got a lot to learn. And if it gets to the point at some point where they ask questions, that's great. So maybe what I'm trying to say is not that you want to be Mr. Advice Giver or Mrs. Advice Giver to anybody. Yeah. Nobody likes that. But I would be a lot more cautious when someone's older than you and be okay with not like doing that for them. Because again, there's this impulse where we have to lead them, we have to encourage them, we have to grow them. I think if they're older, it takes a lot longer, and just having a genuine relationship with them where they feel like you care about them and they can trust you will help you and not feel, not to think in the initial, when you first get to know them, how am I going to lead them? And maybe that's what I'm trying to say. No, don't focus so much on leading them, just focus on a relationship with them.
Yeah, it's funny that they brought that up. Just yesterday, I was listening to a message from another pastor in our network, and he brought up he's not old but older. I don't know, maybe in his 40s. I don't really know how old he is, maybe 50s. But he brought up, I don't remember the context of what he brought up, but he basically said like when you're going through some sort of issue or tragedy, which we're just talking about talking in general, but when you're going through something, he's like, I don't want a first-year seminary graduate to come and talk to me because they feel like they have every answer. He's like, I want the old guy who will just sit and listen and won't try and solve everything, which I think is such a good point because especially if you're younger, you feel like you have to prove yourself and you feel like you have to give the advice that they need or else they're going to come out of this conversation thinking that it wasn't worth their time when that's not what anybody wants for the most part, unless they're literally asking you for advice. So I think especially when you're just talking to someone, if there's not a big issue at hand, just talk and listen and genuinely listen. Like people can tell from a mile away when you're just there because you're supposed to be there because you're pastor. Like actually, hopefully this is the case. I mean, hopefully you actually are meeting with these people because you want to learn from them. Everyone older, and I mean, everyone has something to learn from everybody really, but like, especially if someone's older than you, you have a lot to learn from them, even if it's not biblical things. Like you have life experience to learn from them. And so genuinely listen and don't jump to give advice. Don't jump to like try and solve every issue or try and get them to open up. Like especially I've discovered with older generations, like it people aren't used to opening up in general, especially talking about like men. And like I'll talk to my dad. He'll bring this up. Like he just doesn't like to open up and talk to people he doesn't really know. And so don't try and force someone to open up. Where when you talk to someone younger, sometimes it's a little bit easier to kind of pry them open a little bit or kind of encourage them too, because it's good, especially if you're younger. And it's good if you're older, but at the minute you try and like force that out of somebody, it's going to be real hard to kind of backtrack that conversation if that's not something that they want. So it kind of goes back to 2-3 points ago. Like these things take time, and that's okay. If you're meeting with someone, just meet with them and talk to them and get to know them. And over time, you'll end up being a person that they come to potentially for help and things like that. But you don't have to be. This is gonna sound weird, especially since you're pastor, but you don't always have to be like pastor to everybody 24/7. Like people actually want to have friends and want relationships, and they don't want to feel like they're just being led all the time.
Yeah, I would say it's totally okay to go into the conversation and then leave thinking I didn't necessarily help them in any way.
Yeah, 100%.
That's totally fine. Because it's just listening, learning, not having all the answers. Because again, the older you get, the more you realize you don't. And so meeting someone, especially younger than you, who's like telling you all these things, you're just like, I don't care.
Yeah.
And so ask, listen. Don't feel like you have to, quote unquote, lead them, and just get to know them. I think that would be really beneficial as well.
And I think it's helpful to remember, like, you don't have the life experience they do, and that's fine. But acting like you do is not fine. And I think it can be easy to try and feel like we need to come up with answers to every situation that we've never dealt with, especially if you're younger, where a lot of times, like, you're going to come across people that have dealt with things that you've never had any experience with, and all you can do is listen. And when you try and just like throw out solutions or throw out even like scripture or kind of faith-based answers that they're not asking for, it's going to come across like you're trying to know it all or have every solution to everything, and you don't. And that's okay. You're not supposed to, especially when you're young. And so just listen to people and learn from their experiences, and that's how you learn how to overcome these situations in the future.
Yeah, a little pastoral tip for regardless of how old they are when you meet with somebody. One of my favorite things this sounds bad. It's not my favorite, but I just use this is to say, that sucks. I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
People don't need an answer for everything. And nor, even if you could give them an answer, would it always be satisfactory? Like if people are hurting or whatever, like they just need someone to agree with them. And a lot of that really sucks. I'm really sorry. We can go a long way, especially if they're older than you.
Yeah, so. Absolutely.
And then last but not least, this one is really crucial. That is to genuinely think you can learn from them. So we all know we can learn from people, especially older than us, but like actually think that. And I know what can happen in Christian circles if you're in ministry is like, well, I'm following Jesus, especially if they don't know Jesus or if they're new to the faith or something like that. This can be this idea of, they have more life experience than me, but I know Jesus and I'm following Jesus and they're not. And so, unless they're like a super Christian, I can't learn from them. Like that's just what we can think. And this is not true. There's so much we can learn. You can learn from all the people, especially if someone who's older than you. And so I think genuinely wanting to know and to learn from people and not trying to make everything super spiritual can go a long way. So especially with this last point, when you meet with people, it's like you have a lot to learn from their job experiences, where they've lived, their family, life, relationships, Christian or not. If you've been around, you have life experience that is really valuable for people like us that are younger.
Yep.
And so when you have to have a genuine desire to think and to know that you actually can learn from them. And it's okay if what you learn from them isn't like spiritual and helping you grow closer to Jesus necessarily. It's life wisdom is great. And people love to share what they know. And I think one of the best ways, again, to get someone older to trust in you is for you just to ask them a lot of questions and not tell them a lot of stuff, unless they ask you, right? But ask them about their life experiences or what they've gone through, because you have a ton that you can learn. One of the cool things about being in ministry is that you can learn so much from so many people because we get to interact with a lot of different people. And so it's one of the things that I really enjoy. And so when you're meeting particularly people older than you, have to go into this, I can learn from them. And it will come across if you actually think that.
And I think especially obviously this doesn't really come across if you're meeting with someone who's a non-believer, but if you're meeting with someone who's a believer, even regardless of where you are or where they are, I think you have to think that you can learn something from them too, even if you have a seminary degree and they don't, or you may have So I've noticed this, like there's someone I was talking to recently or a handful of months ago where scriptural knowledge, which is like a stupid parameter, but like I would say I probably have more knowledge of scripture than he does. Like I've just, because of what we do, spent more time in it. And one of the questions he kind of mentioned was something that like, if you spend some time studying the Bible, you kind of know the answer to. It wasn't anything like super complicated. And so it'd be easy for me to come away from that conversation being like, well, maybe I could learn some life lessons from, but I'm not going to learn anything about faith or the Bible or anything like that, because I might know technically more, even though it's a stupid way to put it. But you get what I'm saying. Know more about like, or have more experience than he does in faith or something like that if you've been a believer longer. But there's so many more things as someone who's older that he's gone through and had to deal with than I have, which are faith related. Things like, deaths in the family and things like just that's just one example, but things that they may have gone through where he might not have like the literal scripture knowledge that I might have, whatever, but like he's had life experience that I haven't had, which in a lot of cases is a lot more valuable because he's had to rely on God in those cases more so maybe than I have ever had. And so it can be easy, I think, to maybe, especially if you are a seminary graduate or something like that, meeting with someone who's maybe more immature or more maybe has less knowledge of their faith and things like that, to think maybe I can learn marketplace related things from them, but I can't really learn faith related things. So that's going to be the part they got to rely on me for that. I got to rely on them for this. But like, there's so much to learn even from a newer believer. And so, and I think there's a lot to learn that we kind of forget and overlook when it comes to that case. So
yeah, and again, it's like, I'm gonna give you a recent example of this, of how it's different for people that are older than you, and it's okay. So we've got, I don't know if they're late 50s, early 60s, a couple that started coming, I don't know, a few months ago consistently. And so we had them over for dessert at our house. And then last week, Christine and I, my wife, we went over to their house for dinner. And the conversation was just way different than people that are around our age or younger.
Sure.
Oftentimes we're leading the conversation. We're asking a lot of questions. And this one, like we'll ask like how things are going in their life and like personally, like trying to like dig in a little bit. Now, again, not to tell them what to do, but just we know there's not a lot of spaces for people to be honest about that. When someone that's older than you, and we don't know them super long, although they're awesome, like that would just be kind of weird. And so we didn't talk. I mean, we talked about life, what was going on, but then I spent, this guy does a lot of woodworking on the side, and he has a lot of hand tools, and so I spent half the time it was just me and him in his shed looking at all his tools and talking about it. And Christina and his wife, and the other wife were talking, and like we left and we had a really good time. But there wasn't like, oh, we helped them grow closer to Jesus, which sometimes, which often happens when we have people over around our age, and you can feel like, oh, I didn't do what I was supposed to do. But just know that it's different for different scenarios, and we're getting to know them, they're getting to know us, and they're also spiritually mature, so it's not like they need quote unquote advice.
Yeah.
But if we would come in and be like, tell us about your life so we can help you out, it just wouldn't have gone well.
Mm-hmm.
And so just understanding those dynamics with the age difference can help too.
And it's okay to have conversations that aren't all like faith based. Like it's okay to be a human and want to get to know somebody, to get to know them. Yep. And maybe it turns into that down the road, and maybe you're someone who they'll come to for these questions down the road. But like, if you go into every conversation just with like, how am I gonna pastor today, then it's going to be real difficult to actually have real relationships with anybody, because it's going to look like you're trying to lead everybody. So be a person, be a normal person who can have a conversation with somebody. And I think that a lot of these kind of relationships with people older than you will go a lot smoother than if you're just trying to always think about how you can pastor them.
Yep. So again, these aren't quick fixes. They take time.
Yep.
I know this is a struggle for a lot of people. Hopefully this was helpful for you. 7 tips for leading those older than you. If you want some more tips, there's a lot of places you can go. Practicalplanning.com. We've got a lot of free resources there. We also have our Growing Your Launch Team course. Our YouTube channel, I didn't check before this, but we're either close to, at, or just above 800 subscribers. Mm-hmm. So you can subscribe there. And of course, our Facebook group, Practical Church Planning on Facebook. We have a page that that's just kind of there that we used to upload videos with and don't do anything with.
Look for the group.
It's the group. So sometimes people like message the page or whatever. It's the group, and you can connect and ask questions there. And so thanks for listening, and we'll be with you next week on Practical Church Planting.